this happens with a lot of trans people. You get to a point where you're like, I have to do this or I'll kill myself,
Mm.
which sounds terrible to say that. People are like, oh my God, that's so awful. But I say that as like to emphasize how hard it is to actually do it. You have to be at the point where you're willing to lose everything in your life just to be yourself because the alternative is death.
Welcome to Amy Liz Harrison's podcast, Eternally Amy, a mum of eight's journey from jail to joy. A Gen Xer who overcame her struggle with alcohol to become a best-selling author and mental health advocate. She shares stories of hope and offers ideas for others struggling with mental health challenges, spirituality, ADHD, or maybe just family, travel, and logistics. One thing is for sure, you'll leave with something to chew on. And now, here's your host, Amy Liz Harrison, with your mystery meat sandwich.
Hi, welcome back to Eternally Amy. Today, I've got a big old treat. I have Malorie Cooper on. She's an author, she's a publisher, and for the mystery meat sandwich, I'm starting with this quote from her book, How Wearing Leggings Changed My Life. It's one book out of many that she has. And the quote is this: "To be totally honest, I never expected people to be drawn to me because of my transition. I expected my transition to be a career ender, but just the opposite happened. And I think that it is entirely due to me being open, honest, vulnerable, and authentic. And the more vulnerable and authentic I am, the stronger I become." So, of course, I love that so much because it's my let's get comfortable with the cringeworthy, let's just do it, right? Because the sacrifice is too great if we hide behind these masks. And so I know you're going to enjoy today so much. And here is her bio. Malorie Cooper likes to think of herself as a dreamer and a wanderer, yet her feet are firmly grounded in reality. A 20-year software development veteran, Malorie eventually climbed the ladder to the position of software architect and CTO, where she gained a wealth of experience managing complex systems and large groups of people. Her experiences were translated well into the realm of science fiction. And when her novels took off, she was primed and ready to make the jump into a career as a full-time author. A maker from an early age, Malorie loves to craft things, from furniture to cosplay costumes to a well-spun tale. She can't help but create new things every day. A rare extrovert writer, she loves to hang out with readers and people in general. If you meet her at a convention, she just might be rocking a cat suit, cosplaying one of her own characters, or maybe her latest form of another fandom. She shares her home with a brilliant young girl, her wonderful wife, who also writes, a cat that chirps at birds, a never-ending list of things she would like to build, and ideas. All right, you're in for a big treat. We're talking today about being authentically you or becoming authentically you. Please enjoy.
And now, onto the Chaplain's Chat.
Hello, Mal Cooper.
Hey, how are you doing, Amy?
I'm doing incredible because I am here with you today. And I just want to thank you so much. Malorie Cooper, she's an author, she's a publisher, she's an innovative fashion icon, and an all-around delightful person who I first had the pleasure of meeting a couple months ago. And I feel like I have barely scraped the top of the iceberg with you, that there is so much depth under the surface. And I'm just excited. I'm excited that you're here. More importantly, though, I'm excited that you're in my life. I just really appreciate who you are, who you allow yourself to be and become. And I admire that so much about you. I know as a 40 some odd year old, odd year old. That's something that I and a lot of women my age struggle with is becoming their authentic self and then staying true to who that is.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's our general topic today. Our starting place, at least, is being your authentic self or becoming your authentic self.
Mm-hmm.
And so, first of all, thank you for coming on.
Very welcome. I feel the same way about you. I'm really glad that I met you, and I think you're a fantastic person as well. So I'm excited to be here.
Oh, well, thanks. Thank you so much. Okay, this is how I want to jump into this, if this is okay. This was my favorite quote from your book. I always call it the Leggings book. Sorry about that. It is actually called How Wearing Leggings Changed My Life. Here's my favorite quote. So hold your head high and do the hard things you want to do. Do them without feeling shame, guilt, or fear. People will respect your bravery and vulnerability. In turn, you'll inspire them to do hard things and live authentically.
Gee,
I love it.
I must have had a just total stroke of wisdom there when I wrote that.
Right?
That's really good.
Yeah.
Are you sure that was in my book?
Pretty sure. So, but what I love so much about it is you listed the top things that at least I struggle with: fear, guilt, and shame.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those are like the three pillars of angst for me. So, I appreciated that so much because those are three things that I really try and work on and cultivate a process around so I don't remain captive by those things anymore. Or that's my goal, at least at some point eventually. So Mal, go ahead.
I was gonna say it's an ongoing journey. I don't think I'm ever going to reach the end of it either.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, not easy. But yeah, if you are comfortable telling me a little bit about your background, I do already know some, but just a little recap for listeners.
Sure. So my name is Malorie, and I wasn't born with this name. You might guess that. If you're listening, if you're watching, it might make more sense. So I'm transgender, and I'll be out with them. I'm 44 years old, and I knew probably from age 8 that I was a woman. I thought I was going to grow up to be a woman. Actually, I remember being disabused of that notion at one point. I might have actually been 5 or 6 when I first learned I was not going to be a woman when I grew up. I remember being really sad about that. As it turns out, jokes on them, I did. So I spent a lot of my life struggling with society and religion and friends and family, all telling me that being trans was evil. And of course, that word didn't even exist. Transgender wasn't even a word back then, because this was like, starting in the early to mid 80s. But it does create a lot of a sense of shame and guilt, because you are taught that, in a lot of religions, you're taught that your base instincts are evil and wrong. And I had a lot of reinforcement around that my base instincts were evil and wrong. So it took me a really long time to work through all of those issues and finally get to the point where I could come out as being trans. But I had a pretty good life, all things considered, thus far. I mean, my wife and I, Jill, married when I was 19 and she was 20, and we'll be hitting 25 years this September, which is pretty awesome.
Fantastic.
I know, and our marriage survived me coming out trans, which doesn't always happen. And I had a great career in like software development for a really long time. I made to the top of a number of companies as far as like running their software development teams and stuff like that. Which ironically happens is a lot of trans women have backgrounds in software development.
Really?
Well, it's possibly because autistic people are drawn to software development, and trans people seem to be 15 times more likely to be autistic.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So, but they don't. There's like a whole bunch of theories around that. One of the theories is that autistic people care less about what society thinks about them to begin with, so they're more likely to just be like, screw it and come out. I wish that had been me, but I was not in that situation. I spent a lot of my life not wanting to come out. But the thing that was crazy is this happens with a lot of trans people. You get to a point where you're like, I have to do this or I'll kill myself,
Mm.
which sounds terrible to say that. People are like, oh my God, that's so awful. But I say that as like to emphasize how hard it is to actually do it. You have to be at the point where you're willing to lose everything in your life just to be yourself, because the alternative is death, which is it's terrible that our society works like that, that you have to be at a point where you're willing to sacrifice everything. So I'm also a science fiction author, and I got to become a full-time author in 2017. And that means I got to work from home. And I sort of just abandoned all pretenses of appearing male at that point. Like, I wore jeans like 3 times a year if I had to. And ironically, that's when I started wearing leggings all the time, because I loved leggings. I've always loved the way they look and the way they feel. I'm just like, this is like the perfect pants. Like, why doesn't everybody wear these?
Right.
But the thing that actually really helped me with is that made me I got really good at just not caring what other people thought about me. Because you get a lot of looks if you appear to be a male and you're wearing leggings out in public. People are like, "What the heck is that person doing?" I think I rocked them pretty well. I'm pretty well formed, so I think I did a good job with them. But I got really good at just sort of like not letting everybody else's opinions and thoughts about me and judgments just sort of roll off my back. I would always say, like, I'm a duck and it's just water off my back, is how I would think about it. And I feel like that was like a really good precursor for me to start really like learning more about myself and really what it was I've been dealing with all my life, and to get to the point where it's like, hey, like, I've done this one hard thing. I can now do this other hard thing. But there was a lot to it because, very few marriages, I shouldn't say very few marriages, more and more marriages all the time survive people coming out as trans. But also, I'm a military science fiction writer. Fully half of my readers, if not more, are men who live in the Southeast United States, are Republicans and probably served in the military. So I'm like, my writing career might be over. And all of my contemporaries also fit that mold too. Most of the other science fiction authors are white men who are Republicans. So I was like, I'm going to lose not only my career, I'm going to lose my peer group as well. And I didn't. So that's, I guess, where the story takes off.
In fact, because I first found you on YouTube, and it was on the 20 books, some of their publications that they put out. And there was actually like a fangirl following of you. People were like, what is Mal Cooper going to wear? Oh my gosh, we have to go figure it, like, make sure they went to see it. And I just loved it. I just thought it was so neat the way you've been embraced.
Yeah, that was kind of surreal, that convention. That was just back in this past November. Whenever I had to go to the bathroom, I had to plan it out because it would take me 30 minutes to get to the bathroom with everybody that wanted to talk to me. I'm like, wow, this is insane. Like, I don't know what's happening. And yeah, that was the crazy thing. Now, I should mention that the people that are in my circle are different than the people that were in my circle before, but there are definitely more of them. And I've kind of learned that the more that I put myself out there and be authentic, because when I wrote that book, How Wearing Leggings Changed My Life, I had only come out like maybe 6 months earlier. So I didn't really know for sure how everything was going to go, but it was kind of prophetic, because I did end up in this situation where more people are drawn to me and want to talk with me and learn from me, or just I think people are drawn to people who do brave things and who are authentic, because the alternative is being drawn to people who are cowardly and lie about themselves. So like, it kind of makes sense actually that people would be drawn to that. So yeah. So I found that I've like a much larger friend group now, and I think I'm more approachable too, which is nice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think, I mean, even more than drawn to you, there seems to be this magnetic pull to you, where people probably, I would imagine, see something in you that they sort of wish they could do, in terms of maybe they're not trans or coming out, but maybe it's something else they wish they could share with the world, and they haven't either had the courage to, haven't had opportunities to, can't figure out how to, whatever it is.
Or they're just scared. They're scared of judgment. They're scared of being shamed for being themselves. What you said about shame shame is one of the most powerful motivators, or demotivators, I should say, that people have. And shame is artificial. It's something that you create in your own mind based on what you think other people want from you.
Right.
And I came to a point in my life where I'm like, why am I, if everybody else would actually hate the real version of me when I come out, why am I living my life for those people? You know,
Right.
why would, if these people actually would despise the real me, why would I form myself into something else for their approval? You know? So, and it didn't turn out to be that way. Well, I mean, it did to a certain extent with some people, but yeah, so I've actually abandoned the concept of shame. I don't think that shame is real. Um, I believe that guilt is kind of real, but there's different kinds of guilt. Like I think you can feel guilty for something that you believe you legitimately did wrong, and that's fine. But shame is judgment from other people who think you should be behaving differently than you are, and I don't recognize that as a thing.
I love that you don't recognize it as a thing. And we talked yesterday, just super briefly, or the other day, about concepts that are things and suddenly aren't things as we grow and we
Yeah.
change. And, you know, what, like the concepts of right and wrong. Well, what's right for one person? We don't really know what that looks like or what that is. What's wrong for another person, quote unquote, could be something else. But then it sort of all takes shape and takes form. And then you kind of go, okay, wait a minute. Maybe there isn't a static right or wrong.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah.
Because I mean, there are some things that are objectively wrong that I think we can all agree upon are wrong. But sometimes you can take things that are objectively wrong and put them in context. Like, I don't know, like just say like killing a whole bunch of people. Most people would say objectively that's wrong. But then you said, what if we killed this group of people here and then all the babies in the world got to survive? And if we don't, all the babies die. You know, then it becomes different. Now it's like, wait, now that we have some context around this, maybe it isn't actually wrong to do this particular thing. So it's interesting. But I was told something a while ago that really resonated with me. It took a while to internalize it, but we are all the villain in someone else's story. There's someone out there who despises me and I am like the bad guy. I'm the person that like screwed them over and they despise me and rue the day they ever met me, you know, because we always talk about as writers, we always talk about like the villain thinks that they're doing things, they're doing the right thing.
Sure.
But we are all the villain for somebody.
Yeah.
You know,
Perception, right?
Yeah.
And yeah. And how influence is one of those powerful things where we actually don't know sometimes the extent of our influence and how we affect other people. And yeah,
I don't think we could ever know that, to be honest. So
yeah, it's so true. So was there, if you could pinpoint a moment in time, I don't know if this is a thing or if it was more, no, I just from that point in my childhood on always knew I was a woman. Was there anything pivotal that happened in your life, or was it kind of just a gradual thing where you realized, oh no, I've felt like this for a long time. This is who I am.
I mean, when you're younger, you don't know how to put into words. So I didn't really have a concept of the fact that I was a woman. Well, I kind of did, like, because I still remember playing with my mother's jewelry and shoes and stuff like that when I was probably 6 years old. I remember asking her when I would get to have my own jewelry and heels and stuff like that. And she said never. And I that was like, and I sort of like, so she's like, these are for girls and you're a boy. And I'm just like, wait, what? Like, I'm being denied all this stuff, you know? I think I was like 8 years old the very first time that I dreamt that I was a girl. In my dreams, I was a girl. At least I remember. And I remember how euphoric that was. And probably, it's so funny because if you'd asked me up until 2019, I would have told you that I'm not transgender. But yet every single night, I would fall asleep dreaming about being a girl. and I had a lot of cognitive dissonance I had to get through. And then when I accepted that I was transgender, instantly that stopped. It was just gone. Like I didn't have to do that anymore. Because I'm like, wait a second, I already am. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I blame Maury Povich actually to a
really.
Oh yeah, that asshole. Can I say that on your podcast?
Yes.
So I remember this. I was maybe like 12 or 13 years old. And on the Maury Povich show, they brought out like 5 women who were wearing bikinis and just looked unbelievably gorgeous. They were just, you know, perfection embodied. And after introducing them all, he said, okay, which one of these is a man? Which is pretty triggering on its own, just saying that. And then the punchline is that they were all trans.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And so that did 2 things. And a lot of media threw out one's childhood teaches you that trans people are a punchline. In most, comedies, if there's a trans person, they're a joke, and stuff like that. So you're already taught that like trans is something to laugh at. And then when I saw that, I'm like, oh, well, they must be born differently than me. They must have been born, where their bodies looked like that. And that's why that worked for them. I didn't understand that a transgender person is a transgender, whether they is like I was a woman, regardless of whether I ever came out, and that's true for any other trans person. You don't have to be at the end of your journey to be what you are. You are what you are right now. And recognizing that was really powerful. And that's when everything just like turned on its head, when I realized like, oh, wait, I don't actually have to have had surgeries and all this different stuff to be trans. I'm trans right now. Like that was pretty mind blowing. I think that applies for a lot of other things too in life, that we judge ourselves based on some sort of idealized end of journey position that, we may never achieve. We have to think of ourselves as the thing we want to be now.
Right. Someday when I'm ... or whatever. I want to get a little bit into your faith background. But before we do that, I just wanted to also ask you, gosh, it seems like a lot of work. And so therefore, correct me if I'm wrong, it's like, this is how dedicated I am to, the fact that I am a woman is I will now get up and spend an hour and a half getting ready in the morning. I mean, these are things that I, as a woman, would happily ditch, but I'm not willing to at this moment because I've still got some vanity issues going on.
One of the things I like about you, Amy, we're both a little extra in that regard.
A little extra, yeah.
It feels worth it to do it.
I love that.
But being trans is, I mean, people, there's every now and then, well, actually not every now and then, there's people who constantly say this, that being trans is a fad, and stuff like that. But I mean, if it was a fad, it's the dumbest fad of all time to like instantly, like, I want to be reviled by half the people I meet,
right?
Like why would anyone choose that? And I want to make every single thing I do more difficult. Like no one would do that. It's not something that people do as a fad. I guess maybe some people, I mean, there's always someone, but in general, no. Because you're signing up for, I mean, before you even have to think about the daily process, you're signing up for, full body laser hair removal. Mm-hmm. You're signing up for a lot of electrolysis in places where you really don't want to have electrolysis, because you can't get your surgeries until you've done that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You are signing up for going through a second puberty, because that's what happens when you switch your hormones. You actually go through the other gender's puberty. So I'm like halfway through female puberty, I would say at this point. And even though trans women, don't bleed, we still actually have a hormonal cycle, and you get to discover exactly how terrible you feel certain days of the month, and how like anything anyone says feels like a knife to the heart. And you're just like, what is wrong with me? Why can't I take an emotional punch today at all? And then it happens, you check the calendar and it happened a month ago, the last time, and you're like, oh God, this is terrible. Makes
sense now. Yeah.
It's you get a really keen understanding for how testosterone actually shields you from having to deal with emotions, was one of the things I learned as well. The expression on your face is just like, gee, that would be nice.
I know. I'm like in this dream like zone where I'm like, oh, sounds good.
To be honest though, I'd rather feel all the things than not feel things the way I feel them now. But that's, I mean, trans men feel the opposite. So it's probably just, it's what fits me. Right. Yeah, so there's all that, and you're signing up for, spending thousands of dollars on surgeries, and, even things like having to buy a whole new wardrobe in the middle of your life, like that's not a cheap thing to do either. Potentially losing your job, losing your friends, losing your family. And that's all the hard things you have to decide to do before you're even just like, okay, now every day I have to do all these things, because even like I've only had laser hair removal. So I still have a lot of hair on my face because it doesn't get rid of everything. And a lot of the hair that I had was white already, so laser doesn't get rid of that. So I gotta do like a baby smooth job shaving every day. And because my skin is basically translucent, even when I do a perfect job shaving, you can still see the hair follicles through my skin. So I have to wear full face makeup every single day. Otherwise, you would see hair still in my face.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is, I'm committed. That is commitment. That to me is when it is no longer an option for you to live the other lifestyle,
Mhm.
so much so that you are willing to go through all of that.
Yeah.
And that's
You know,
massive.
on the flip side, I actually did, like, when I sat back and was honest with myself about how much time I ever spent every day, sort of like wishing that I was someone else, something else. It was probably equivalent to the amount of time I spend doing makeup every day.
That's fascinating.
I probably
That's
chewed up an hour to an hour and a half every single day. So
interesting, right? Instead of dreaming about something, actually doing that and becoming it are two totally different things. Yeah, that's incredible. Okay, so you did mention your family, or not your family, but family in general, family and friends having difficulty accepting transgender people.
Yeah.
And how did that go for you? And how was it intertwined with your faith background?
Yeah, so I grew up evangelical, and I grew up like German evangelical, which is like very staunch evangelicalism. It's like Mennonites mixed with evangelicals. We would have jokes like, why don't I don't know if this is off color or not. Why don't evangelicals have sex standing up? Because it might lead to dancing.
Okay, I'm Baptist or was raised Baptist, and I love that.
Yeah, that probably works for Baptists too. Yeah. So of course, like I was like sneaking women's clothing to try and like pretend I was actually a girl as early as like maybe 10 years old. And, my father sat me down and read from the Bible about how like a man wearing women's clothing is detestable to the Lord, and stuff like that. So I had that stuff resonating in my mind all my life. And I always felt like there were two versions of me and I was trying to destroy one of them. And I never could. There were times where like I would like burn everything that I had, all the women's clothing I had. I think I did like when I was 14 and when I was 16 again. And I would just go right back out and get it. I wouldn't last very long at all before I started to find some at thrift stores and whatnot. And of course, the other thing that society tells you, especially back then, a lot less so now, is they're like, oh, it's just a fetish. You're just a cross dresser,
Right.
This is just how you get off or something like that. And because, you think, well, clothing doesn't make you a woman, right? So why are you so focused on dressing like a woman? It's like, well, you just want to appear to be the thing that you are on the outside. Because right now you feel on the inside, but you don't feel on the outside. So maybe if you wear the right clothes, you'll feel that way on the outside. And to be honest, I think everybody does that with the clothing that they choose to wear. It's because they're wearing certain clothing to appear to be a certain way to everybody around them. And that's why, trans people want to, a lot of times they think they're just cross-dressers earlier on. I shouldn't say just cross-dressers because I have no judgment against people who just cross-dress for whatever reason they want to, but they don't understand that what they're dealing with is something a lot deeper. Yes, my faith, like I was like an elder in the church that I went to and all sorts of stuff like that in my 30s and whatnot. So I was all the way in, but still in my mind, sort of like constantly struggling with the fact that like, that I was sinful because of what I am. Like I actually haven't, other than like some shirts, I haven't owned men's clothing since like the year 2000, like I was just really good at buying women's clothing that I could pass off as men's clothing. So I finally managed to sort of deconstruct all of that when I decided that I wasn't, that I didn't believe anymore, that I was an atheist. I finally managed to start tearing apart my worldview, which takes forever because there's so many layered things about what you believe and what you think that you don't realize is informed from the religious upbringing you had. And you're like, well, why do I believe this? And you start digging, and you're like, oh, it's just because I got told that in Sunday school from someone who read it from a pamphlet. That's why I believe that. Like, that's not a valid reason to hold this belief really strongly for my entire life. So you just, and it's like you're, I don't know, like you're trying to kill gophers on the prairie. Like there's always more of those things that you find. But when I came out, it was interesting because I realized I was trans in spring of 2019. And I was going to be going home to visit my family in August because my family lives in Canada and I live down in New England in the States. And I was like, do I tell my parents before or after I see them? Because I was going to be there for 2 weeks. And I realized if I tell them at the very end, that would seem really disingenuous. Like, hey, I'm trans, bye, hop on a plane and be gone.
Real.
Yeah. And I also realized I couldn't wait that long anyway. I couldn't live. I don't do well in limbo. When I make a decision about something, I like to execute that decision and move forward. So I wrote them both letters, because my parents are divorced. I wrote my father and my mother a letter explaining that to them. And I was actually really surprised. My father's very first statement to me was, he said, "I'm sorry. That must have been really hard to live like that your whole life." Um, and I
Okay.
was like, I did not expect that from him.
Yeah.
Like, really thoughtful and insightful. And my mother's reaction was not as good as that. And so basically, what happened is I basically had no contact with my mother's side of the family at all anymore. And but my father's side of the family, even though they're still evangelical Christian, have actually all accepted me. Well, not all of them, but my father and my stepmother are, and a lot of their families. So that
Mhm.
was that was really nice, actually, that they welcomed me and embraced me, and other than a couple of slip ups, treated me, gave me use the right pronouns and the right name and everything. So that part was really nice. But I probably lost about a third of my friends. I lost probably half of my professional peers, probably half of my readers. So it was a pretty big sacrifice.
Huge. And there's that saying, people who mind don't matter, people who matter don't mind. And I'm just curious to know if, the difference between accepting and supporting, I
Mm-hmm.
think is interesting too. Did you feel supported by the remainder of the people who were still around?
I do buy a lot of them. Yeah. One of the things I learned is there's way more trans people around than people think there are. Because trans people kind of become invisible after about 4 or 5 years after coming out. Like if it wasn't for my voice, I don't think most people would be able to tell that I'm trans. And I know lots of trans people that I was shocked by to learn that they were trans. And I discovered so many people who have trans kids as well. And they said, like, they were telling me stories about how it was so inspirational to see someone like me come out as trans and for me to be supported because it made them feel better about their own children's future. They're like, wow, if Malorie can come out, at 41 years old at that point, and get all the support, then maybe there's like my child is going to have a better life than I thought they would, stuff like that. So there was a lot of that happened. There are some people that are definitely not in my backyard that you kind of discover, and
Uh-huh.
sometimes they surprise you. I had some very, very close friends that I discovered were supportive of trans people so long as they didn't have to interact with trans people. So I actually lost a number of really close friends because of that. But
Interesting.
I feel like the people that have replaced them in my life are such people of such high quality that I don't mind.
Good, good. Yeah. As you were sharing that, I was thinking about just how difficult that would be to get to the point where you're actually willing, like it is so important for you to come out as your genuine self, to put forth who you are, that, yeah, this is going to actually probably most likely upset the entire apple cart.
Hmm.
And to look back on all those different reasons and sort of feel probably, I would imagine, just correct me if I'm wrong, but compelled. Like, well, it's actually not an option. Like,
Huh.
sorry, I might lose half of these folks and half of these relationships. So this is a meandering way of asking, um, do you feel like, how do I want to word this? Do you feel as if there are people who see your inner beauty for who you are? They don't look at anything on the outside at all. Do you feel like people haven't really kind of reached that maturity level yet? Have you had an experience with that? Or do you pretty much primarily find it's either people sort of accept the whole idea or they don't?
That's a really good question. I don't know that I know the answer to that exactly. I One of the things that surprised me is it was actually at Inkers Con, which is a writers convention that I was at in early May of 2019, where I sort of like partially came out because I went to this writers convention to speak about Facebook ads. And I found myself in a group of writers that I didn't know. I didn't know any of them, and they didn't know me, except for like one or two people. And that was in Dallas, and for whatever reason, I had decided to try being a transgender woman in public in Dallas. I don't know why decided to do that. It was convenient. Someone
Yeah.
had said to me like the way to tell if this is really you is to actually just do it, to go out and be a woman and see if it feels right or not. And it felt perfect. For the first time, I felt like people interacted with me the way I wanted them to. But the thing that surprised me so much, and the thing that made me realize that it was the right choice more than anything, is that the women that I met at that convention immediately welcomed me amongst them as a woman. And I guess back then I did not. I looked like a man in a dress. Not to that. That's a hurtful stereotype, but it's looking back. I'm kind of like I looked like myself, but wearing a dress. Like I wasn't. No one was being fooled that I wasn't transgender, but that didn't seem to matter to them at all. They immediately, like, they were offering to go to the bathroom with me, to make sure I'm safe and all that sort of stuff. And I discovered something that I didn't know existed is the sisterhood that women have with each other. And men don't have a thing like that. And I realized that was actually one of the things I've been missing in my life as well. So there are so many layers to what I discovered that I had been missing and that I wanted. And so much of it I didn't have a way of knowing about until after I came out. But I guess that experience tells me that a lot of people did embrace me right away, despite how I look or anything like that. And I just lucked out that I actually turned out to be pretty. So it's like,
Yeah,
it's a bonus.
I love that because, as we're talking about this, I'm thinking.
I feel so hubristic saying that, by the way. I feel so terrible saying that because I feel like that means it's something art, but.
No.
I guess when I say that, I should just say when I say that I'm fortunate that I'm a pretty is because you get privilege with being pretty. There is called pretty privilege, and it's with so much other stuff going against you. It's kind of nice to have that in your corner.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, especially if you've lived half of your life not feeling like you are in the correct body and and having the correct thoughts and feelings for that gender or for that physicality. So what I was thinking of, though, specifically too, as you were talking about that, I thought, that's amazing that your Dallas experience, it's so beautiful to hear that. And it just makes me a little bit sad. It's like some folks, and this is fine, and we can't control other people, we know that, but some folks aren't willing to change or are not willing to be open-minded. And my husband came home yesterday and was telling me an amusing anecdote about a conversation he had with one of our family members. And this person had literally written a letter to another family member and given them a big lecture about why this person, why they disapproved of the person's behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And the person was completely willing to lose the relationship. It wasn't a thing. The principle of standing by the right and wrong, the sinful versus holy, was far outshined the whole idea of having a relationship with a family member. And to me, you mentioned earlier, the cognitive dissonance, that you experience. That's the perfect term for this for me, is that I can't fathom that. I just can't fathom being willing to not have a relationship with one of my kids, for example.
I used to be that person, by the way. I was the person for who being right was more important than anything else.
Yeah.
And I was kind of an asshole as a result of that. I believed that I was right, and I would force that belief on anyone around me. And I actually think that's a symptom of religion, because religion tells you that you have access to ultimate truth and all the answers. Right. And so people assume that their interpretation one is perfectly correct, and then they go and use that as a weapon against everybody around them.
And correct for everybody.
Yes.
Universally correct.
Yeah.
Which I did the same thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like I need to make just a public apology for all of the people who I totally offended with my prideful, I've got the solution for you and for everybody else, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
It's embarrassing when I think back on it now. But
the things that I said to people and the friendships that I lost because of that will be things I'm going to regret for the rest of my life. Those are things I feel guilt over, because I was wrong and I treated other people badly as a result of this flawed belief system that I'd given myself over to. Mm-hmm. But that whole thing of what you said about being right was more important than the family member. I discovered that too. I came to that realization. It was only a couple of years ago when I realized that the problem with my mother was she was more interested in being right then she wasn't having a relationship with me. And
Yeah.
I realized that I was far more interested in having friends and relationships with people than being right. Like, I don't need to prove to everybody else that I'm right. I don't need to spend my time trying to plumb the depths of the universe to find ultimate truth, even, because I don't think it exists anymore. Like, I think that was a exercise in futility that I spent 30 years at, like.
I'm at the same spot. It's so refreshing to hear you say that, because I'm at that same spot where, yeah, I had spent all this time thinking I've got to have all the answers, because for me, um, Christianity, or at least the way I was interpreting it and practiced it, was assurance. I had all the answers. I was certain about everything. And I met this Buddhist monk who's a friend, and he was also raised evangelical. And he said to me, yeah, the amazing thing about Christianity is you have to have all the answers. But it's when you feel okay sitting in the questions that you really get that solid center. And when he said that to me, I thought, I want that. That's what I want. And so what's interesting is it's not a far reach. It's like all I had to do to get that was to surrender to the process and surrender to, I don't know everything. I have no idea. And just let all those walls fall down and let spirituality be totally rebuilt in me, whatever form that took.
The process sounds a lot easier than mine was. I wish I had a Buddhist monk that gave me some words of wisdom like that. That would have shortened a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Mine was
What did it look like for you?
Well, so I started writing science fiction novels. That was the downfall of me being a Christian. So I started really researching science and the universe and how we know the things that we know. And because a lot of times people who don't really understand these things are just like, oh, well, science will say a new thing tomorrow, and they can't prove that and whatnot. But when you really start looking at why we believe the things we believe, and like it wasn't that someone just came up with like, hey, there was probably a Big Bang thing and it made a universe. They're like, well, they're looking at the universe and trying to come up with a reason why it looks the way it does. It's the same thing when they realized that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe. They kept trying to map objects in the sky, and it wouldn't work when the Earth was the center of the universe. They tried coming up with new ways to think about it. And they're like, oh, the Earth goes around the sun, not the other way around. And now suddenly all the observations line up with what you would expect to have happen.
Right.
And so I started learning about all that and realizing that science was not something that I could sort of just ignore. And I was always a very logical scientific person. I was a software developer, but there's certain things like, oh, well, they might just be wrong about this. But like, no, they're really right. Like the reason why we know how far long ago the Big Bang was is because there's still the echo of it all around us all the time. It's called the cosmic microwave background radiation. For those of us who remember static on the television, it's what makes static on the television. That's the echo of the Big Bang. And they can like look at the rate in which the echo is fading. And that's one of the ways they can tell how old the universe is. And there's other ways too. Like there's a lot of things that line up. And when I started realizing that, I'm like, this is starting to become really irrefutable. Like I'd have to be like denying the existence of my own nose at this point to deny this stuff anymore. I'm like, who's the fool at that point? So that was happening. And at the same time, I was studying, I don't know what got me on this. I was studying the ecumenical councils that happened in the early Christian church, because before the Catholic Church was around, the patriarchs of different cities would get together and they would argue about what Jesus and Paul said and try and form a religion. And there's a patriarch from Byzantine, the big patriarch from Rome and Jerusalem, all that. And they would have these councils where they would get together and talk about what the faith actually looked like. And one of the things that they could not agree upon was whether or not Jesus was wholly man, or whether or not he was wholly God, or whether he was some mixture of the two. And in Western Christianity, they believed that Jesus was both fully man and fully God. So the temptations and the problems that he went through and all of that suffering was valid because he was fully human. And the Eastern Orthodox Church doesn't believe that. They believe that when Paul baptized Jesus, it burned the humanity out of him and he was wholly God after that point. I'm like, well, that kind of like cheapens the sacrifice. Because then he knows that he's wholly God, and like the temptation by Satan in the desert means nothing because he's just like, yeah, what ifs, I'll be zombie Jesus in a couple of days, and it won't matter. Like, screw you, It's so irreverent. I feel terrible.
Oh,
it's so funny at the same time.
So good.
But
Totally.
anyway, hopefully I'm not offending any of your listeners. But what I
Oh,
realized, what I realized is that these two churches believed wildly different things about
yes.
the faith, to the point where they had a schism and they could not even cooperate after that. Like, it fractured the church. But the thing I realized is, like, there's just as many people who live basically east of Rome who believe that I'm wrong as there are people on my side that believe I'm right. And they have all their scholars and all their wise people and all their books and their universities and their centuries of study that say that they're right. And my people have the opposite. And I'm like, I realized at that point, I had this moment where I realized my entire belief structure is based on where I was born and is not founded in truth. I just believe the things I was told to believe by the people who were around me when I was growing up.
Mhm.
It was like my belief system is based on geography. That doesn't make any sense. You can't make a belief system based on geography. So I didn't have the Buddhist monk. So I systematically stripped away all of my beliefs except for the things I felt that all humans shared. And I sort of rebuilt my belief system from there,
Mhm.
which took a while. But so that was my
Yeah.
process.
Well, that's incredible. And I love what you said too. It's like, yeah, a lot of the things that I believed, I remember it started with Jonah and the whale, the story of Jonah and the whale. One day I was literally driving down the freeway, and this is, I'm going to guess like maybe 15 years ago. And I was like, you know what? I don't know if I believe that that really happened literally. And that was like the first dawn of a new something being birthed in me, where I started to sort of think, well, maybe this stuff is more figurative. And
Yeah.
maybe that's why I've had such issues with it along the way, and maybe it's just kind of supposed to be like more like the idea of poetry. And then, of course, I started reading Richard Rohr and Father Richard Rohr, who I love, and really unpack. Yeah, wait a minute. Why I've been following all this stuff my whole life exactly as it is laid out, and it has done nothing for me but create angst and a Santa Claus God mentality, transactional.
Mhm.
And maybe there's something new. I need to be open to a new way of looking at it, perhaps.
Yeah. I think I had some points along the way like that as well. They took different forms, but yeah, with the result was like, maybe I need to like reframe how I'm interpreting all of this and be open to a new way of understanding it, which was, and then like, but then I guess in a way I did have to confront myself with like, I don't actually know all the answers,
Yeah.
but yeah, the thing that's kind of wild is when you get rid of, so I don't necessarily believe that there's any higher power. I'm open to the possibility. I'm not like instantly denying it, but you actually get the sense of freedom in a way because you don't suddenly feel responsible for everything around you. You just feel responsible for yourself.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And I think that's one of the most interesting things too, is that you start having this new pair of glasses, right? Where you're looking through these lenses of like, let's see what happens here. Let's see what unfolds, and it just becomes such a lighter way to live,
Yeah.
just kind of holding on to life like wearing a loose garment where it's kind of
I don't know what
just,
that's like.
you have no idea. Yeah.
We should get to that topic at some point too.
Let's do it. Okay, let's switch gears. I'm all about let's take a hard left. Let's talk about fashion.
Finally, here's your bailout bag.
So for the bailout bag today, wow. Talked a lot about deconstruction, reconstruction of faith. And what I'd like to do is hook it back to the beginning, the mystery meat sandwich, where I read the quote from Mal's book, How Wearing Leggings Changed My Life, about being authentic, honest, vulnerable. And if you're in a place where you might be looking at your own faith and wondering possibly if you might need to look at it from a different perspective, do it. I'm just going to give you permission to do it. What could it hurt, really? I mean, I didn't get struck by lightning. Mal didn't get struck by lightning. I don't think you will either. I think the God of the universe, the higher power, is strong enough and big enough to handle it.
Thank you so much for listening to Eternally Amy. Amy Liz Harrison is a best-selling author, speaker, 12-step coach, meditation teacher, and recovery advocate. To find out more, please visit amylizharrison.com. Keep up with Amy on all platforms by following @AmyLizHarrison. Please subscribe and review this podcast. It means so much to us if you do.